Let's say I have this awesome to-do list application where the user can add tasks and check them off. Now the task list is private for each user. This means the user must first sign up for the app before they can try it out. I've already done this in this case, but let's try logging out here. So this is the page that a new user will see when they first visit the app. We give a nice description trying to convince them to try it, and hopefully they will click the try it for free button. But when they do, what do they get? A sign-up form. At this point, I expect a lot of potential customers to just leave because they don't want to give their personal information just to try out an app. So how could we improve this user experience? Well, instead of bringing them to this form, we can create a temporary guest account in the background, which they can try out the application with and then later on choose to sign up for a permanent account if they like it. Now, the first question that comes to mind is, should we store the guest user account in the database if it's just temporary? Well, the way I have this set up now is that a user model has many tasks, and that's the association I'm going through in the tasks controller to ensure that the tasks are private for each user. We could keep track of a guest's task IDs inside of a session and then query off of that in here, but that can quickly get out of hand as our application grows and we have other different associations with our user record. Also, this would mean that we have a lot of user ID foreign keys in our database that will be null, and we would have to have conditions based off of that, and we have no way of knowing if two tasks are shared by the same guest user, and so on. Therefore, I find it cleanest to keep track of the guests in the database. So I'm going to generate a new migration for this to add a guest column to the users table, and that will be a Boolean field. Then I'll migrate the database. Now I just need to make it so when the user clicks the try it for free button, it automatically creates a new guest user account for them. Well, here's the template containing that try it button, and this is currently going to the new user path, but I want to instantly create a new user record, so I want to go to the users path with a post action. We could just leave this method off. I think it'll do post by default, but I prefer to be clear here. So this will trigger the user's controller create action, which is currently set up to take user parameters through the form, but if none are present, then I want to create a new guest user record. So let me check if they're present, and otherwise, let's build a new guest, and that's going to be a class method on the user model so we can have this all in one place. Now here's what the user model looks like, and if you haven't noticed already, I'm doing authentication from scratch as demonstrated in the revised episode number 250. I'm doing this using HasSecure Password, which Rails provides. It's a very convenient way to do authentication. It takes hardly any code at all. Now, if you're using Devise or some other authentication gem, you'll probably need to vary this technique I'm demonstrating here, but I'll give you some tips throughout the episode on how to do that. So the first thing I want to do in this user model is create that new guest class method, and that should create a new user record. And let's set the guest attribute to true for this. I'm doing this inside of a block because the guest attribute is protected from mass assignment. Okay, so now we have this set up, so the guest user will be created whenever we click that button. But what if we want this to work a little differently? Maybe we don't want to override the user's controller create action here, or maybe we want a guest user to always be available if we try to access a current user when one isn't logged in. Well, in that case, you can override the current user method and then have this fall back to creating a new guest user if there is no user signed in. That's an alternative approach that I won't be using here, but it is a useful technique for guest users. Okay, let's try this out. Reloading this page and clicking try it for free attempts to create a new user record, but we get some validation errors and it takes us to the sign up form. Not really what we want. So what we need is for this new guest method to always return a valid user record, and there's multiple ways we can do this. One option is to fill this user with fake data. Just give them a random email address and username and password so that it passes the validations. Well, that's certainly a feasible option, but what if we have different authentication techniques, such as signing in through Twitter? It's certainly hard to fake that data. And also, why fill our database with data that we aren't really using? So instead, I'm just going to make these validations conditional. Most of the case is right here. This validates presence of. I only want this to happen unless we have a guest user. And then for the other validations, you can pass in the allow blank option, which is likely what you want anyway, since you already have the presence validation. Now let's try this again, clicking this button, and our validations are still failing because it expects a password. Now that validation is added automatically by HasSecure Password. Now in Rails 4, you'll be able to pass in a validations option and set that to false, so it skips those validations and then you can set them manually. But unfortunately, this isn't available in Rails 3, which is what we're using here. However, the implementation for HasSecure Password is surprisingly simple. The method is only about a dozen lines long, and most of the logic is included through this module, which we can easily include manually. So what we do is need to mimic this functionality here. I'm just going to paste in these changes that are necessary in this user record. What this will do right here is basically mimic the functionality of HasSecure Password without the validations. That way we can add validations manually, which is what I'm doing here, adding the password digest to making sure it's present if we are not a guest, and also adding a password confirmation. Now, if you're using Devise and want to do something similar to this, you can remove the validatable module from the user and add the validations manually, or alternatively, you can override the email required and password required methods so that they are dependent upon whether the user is a guest. Okay, let's try our application once more and see if this works. When we click Try It for Free, we get to our awesome to-do list instantly where we can add items and then check them off without even being a complete signed-in user. Now, there will likely be some issues with this, such as right here it says logged in as blank. We should give some indication that they're currently logged in as a guest and can sign up for full membership. We can find this in the application layout file, logged in as, and then displaying the username. I don't want to display this though because that is blank for the guest user. Instead, let's make a method called name on the user model, and we'll define that in here. And that will just check if the user is currently a guest, and if they are, display the word guest as their name. Otherwise, let's display the username. Reloading the page, and there we go. Now we just need a way for them to become a member. So back in the layout file, I'll just add an if condition to see if the current user is a guest, and then if they are, let's display a link to say become a member, and we'll just direct them to the normal sign up form. And otherwise, I'll display the logout link. Now, you might want to make a logout link for guests as well, but just be a little more careful with that since they can't log back in. So the trickiest part of this all is that we need to persist the user's tasks when they become a member and sign up for a real account. Now, there are several different ways that we can go about this. One option is to change this create action so that it updates the current user record and removes the guest flag instead of creating a new record. But in my testing, that got a little messy, trying to juggle both new and existing user records in the same action. Instead, what I'll do here is move the associated data from the current user to the newly created user. So I can call maybe a method called move_to, which I'll make later. Move the data to the newly created user only if we have a current user and that current user is a guest. So in this user model, I'll define that move_to method, and that takes a user argument. So this will go through all the different associations, such as the tasks, call update all on them, setting the user ID to the new user's ID. Now, you might also want to destroy this guest user, but be careful with that because it might have the association still tied with it. For example, if has many tasks and dependent is destroy, then that would end up destroying the tasks are associated with, even though we updated them all to the new user. What I suggest is creating a rake task to remove old guest accounts. So I'll do that here, make a new file, let's call it guests.rake. And I'll paste these contents in. So we have this guests cleanup task, which loads the Rails environment, and then goes through all of the guest user records, which are created more than a week ago, and destroys them all. So you'll probably want to notify the users somehow, display on the page that their guest account is going to be gone within a week, so that they can move over to a permanent account if they want to save it. By the way, you may want to set up this rake task as a daily cron job using the whenever gem as demonstrated in episode 164. So now with this in place, when the user clicks become a member and fills in the sign up form and clicks on it, they become that user and all the tasks and associations are transferred over to that new user record. And I just noticed there's a typo there. Oh well. Well, that's it for this episode on creating guest users. Thanks for watching. TurboLinks is a gem that will be included by default in new Rails 4 applications, but it's also compatible with Rails 3, so we can use it there in the meantime. This gem can make your application feel faster to the user by using JavaScript to replace the HTML body of new pages instead of relying on a full page load. Well, let's try this gem out in a Rails 3 application. Here's the app I'll be using. It's a to-do list app where I have multiple projects, and each project can have a set of tasks where I can check a task off and it'll instantly move it down to completed and back and forth. So let's try TurboLinks in this app. First, I need to go into the gem file and add in the TurboLinks gem into here, and then you'll need to run the bundle command to install it. And then next I'll go into the app assets application.js file and add in a line into here to require TurboLinks. Now TurboLinks doesn't depend on jQuery, so you can use it even if you don't use jQuery in your app. Now if I restart my Rails app and reload this page, I can try browsing around my site again, and I don't really notice any difference. Now we can check if TurboLinks is active by opening the network inspector in our browser and then browsing around the site. And it appears that a full page reload is happening every time I visit a link, so TurboLinks isn't active here. Now I'm using Safari 5 here, which doesn't appear to be supported in the current release of TurboLinks, so I could try upgrading to Safari 6 or use something like Google Chrome. One thing we can see with this is that TurboLinks expects a recent browser, but if it's not supported, it will degrade gracefully and our application will still work like we expect. But if you're testing it in development, make sure that the browser you're using does support TurboLinks so that we can catch any odd bugs that might incur from it. So let me try this again, this time using the most recent version of Chrome. And when I have the network tab open and browse through the application, you can see it doesn't do a full page reload. It simply requests the one page from the Rails app and handles it through turbolinks.js. So browsing around the site will just do a single request for each of the pages. This can make the site feel faster to the user because the browser isn't reinterpreting the JavaScript and CSS each time the page loads. So how does this work exactly? Well, what TurboLinks does is listen to a click event on each of the links on a page. And when that happens, it's going to make the request over JavaScript and then take a look at the response body. It will then use JavaScript to update the current page with this new content, replacing the title tag and the body tag so it looks like this new page. It also uses the pushState API in JavaScript to handle the URL so it looks like it's going to the other pages. Now this technique is very similar to PJAX, which I covered in episode 294. Alright, so this appears to be working great, but you may find some of your existing JavaScript stops working. For example, if I try to check a box here to mark a task as complete, it just doesn't do anything. It doesn't hit our JavaScript, and we don't even seem to get any JavaScript errors to help us out. However, if I try reloading this page and click the checkbox again, now it's working. So what's going on here? So here's the CoffeeScript I have for this app, and what it does is listen to the click event for each of the task checkboxes. And when this happens, it will submit that task form, which ends up triggering the marking a task as incomplete or complete. Now the important line in this situation is right here, this jQuery function call. Another way to write this is $document.ready and passing a function in there. What this will do is listen to the ready event on the document, which will get triggered when the DOM is done loading. This is important here so that we have some checkboxes to select here. Otherwise, if we didn't have this document.ready call, it would try to select the checkboxes before the HTML page is done loading. However, when we're using TurboLinks, that callback will only be triggered on the initial page load. So if we load this page initially, this doesn't have any checkboxes, so it won't listen to the click event on anything. But when we go to a project, it doesn't trigger that DOM ready event since we're kind of technically still on the same HTML document. This is why checking a box here does not end up doing anything. Now there are several events that TurboLinks will trigger, such as the page load event, and we can use this to simulate the DOM ready behavior. So back in our CoffeeScript, here's what this might look like. First I'll set this function to a variable so we can reference it. I'll pass this to the DOM ready event, and I also want to pass this to the page load event, which TurboLinks will trigger. So that way, whether we're using TurboLinks or not, that this function will be called. So now with that changed, our JavaScript behavior is working again with TurboLinks. If you want the behavior to work like this automatically, check out the jQuery TurboLinks gem. Now there is another way we can work around this problem. Instead of selecting the elements and then listening to the click event on each one, what we can do is listen to the click event on the document. And this way, it will, each time we get a click, it's going to check if it's on the checkbox for a task and then trigger this callback. So we don't even need to put it in any kind of DOM ready event. This will just be applied to any checkboxes that are added to our HTML even after this JavaScript is executed. So we can try this out and see that it's fully compatible with TurboLinks, and it has a side benefit that if we added tasks using Ajax, those would automatically have that click event applied to them too. Now, it's a good idea to keep an eye on the TurboLinks issue tracker because there are some critical gotchas that you should be aware of. For one thing, there are several third-party JavaScript libraries which are incompatible with TurboLinks, such as Twitter Bootstrap or jQuery UI Calendar, and those are getting a fix for them soon, I believe. Also, there are some other odd situations where hitting the reload or back button in certain browsers can cause some unexpected behavior, such as this issue mentioned here where it submits a post request where one expects a GET request. And there are workarounds to these kind of issues, such as passing in a data node TurboLink attribute in the body tag if it's a post request, as mentioned here. And that will basically disable TurboLink for that given page request. But that's a workaround that hopefully won't be needed in future versions of TurboLink, but for now, you can consider doing this. Now, with all of these gotchas mentioned, you may be wondering, is TurboLinks worth it? In that case, I recommend you check out this project, TurboLinks Test, put together by Steve Klabnik. It runs a lot of benchmarks for different situations, checking to see if TurboLinks does give a nice speed boost. And in most situations, the results are quite astounding. If you check out the number here in parentheses, that's the time difference in seconds for running a various number of requests. Of course, every application is different, so you may want to take these benchmarks and apply them to your app so you can see if the speed boost is worth it. Now, if you're creating a new Rails 4 application and decide not to use TurboLinks, you can easily remove it by just taking out the gem mentioned in the gem file and removing the line in the application.js file. At least that's the way it works in the master branch of Rails at the moment. Overall, I think TurboLinks shows a lot of promise and can make your Rails application feel faster than ever. Just watch out for the gotchas. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.